I don't feel like I'm responsible for that damage. I feel like the damage is the responsibility of the party that applied this polyurethane to the painting. That is, when they applied that polyurethane, they set into motion a series of events that now I'm just cleaning up. That is, they planted a landmine, and I'm just now stepping into it. So I'm going to do the best I can removing this polyurethane, and then I'm going to do the best I can with retouching. But this is a situation where you kind of have to sigh and say, it is what it is. Now, I also mentioned that some spots were more difficult to remove than others, and in those areas, I switched from scraping with a scalpel to using a different technique. Now, for those areas, I was using a hot air pencil. And a hot air pencil is a tool that projects a superheated stream of air. Now, this air can be heated up to anywhere from about 120 degrees to about 1,000 degrees. Now, I'm definitely not using 1,000 degrees here because I'd not only melt the painting, but I would probably burn myself as well. I'm using a relatively low heat, and I'm doing so in hopes that it's going to soften up this polyurethane enough that I can peel it back and remove it with less losses than if it was cold and brittle. Because these are areas that I discovered had a really, really strong bond. And trying to chip them off when the polyurethane was cold and brittle just wasn't working. The polyurethane was too well bonded to the paint, and it was taking off too much paint, which is why I switched to the hot air pencil. Now, the hot air pencil is not a perfect tool. As you can see, some paint is still being lost. And that just goes to show how strong this polyurethane is. Now, if there were any other technique that would get this polyurethane off with no damage, I would have switched to that in a heartbeat. But I have a lot of experience removing polyurethane from paintings, and there are really only two ways to do it, chemically or mechanically. And chemically usually doesn't work with paintings. Unlike on wood, where you can coat the entire thing with an industrial grade stripper and let it sit overnight and come back with a scraper and just kind of scrape it all off. If you did that with a painting, you'd be left with bare canvas at the end of the day. Now, I can't sand it off with a random orbital sander like I could on a piece of wood because, again, I just have a raw piece of canvas. So scraping and chipping and a hot air pencil is the best that we have at this point. Now, at some point in the future, if a better technique or approach comes along, I will be the first to jump on board because I have probably lost more years of my life in frustration scraping polyurethane off of paintings than I care to admit. But, like I said, it is what it is. So, with all of this polyurethane now finally removed, we can start to get a glimpse. Every step of the way is frustrating, and the painting fights you. And I thought that this was going to be that way when I started scraping. And so to find that the adhesive that was used to glue the painting to the plywood was very cooperative was a blessing and a big sigh of relief. Now, that said, I still had to get the thing off, and I had to go slowly because the last thing I wanted to do was put a hole in the canvas or tear it or put any undue stress on that paint layer. But working slowly, I was able to detach all of that adhesive from the canvas and that piece of fabric and successfully remove the original from this piece of plywood. And that plywood went straight into the garbage. There's nothing of value there. There's no forensic analysis that would be redeeming. It just gets thrown away. Now, once the painting is fully removed from that plywood, I now have to remove that adhesive from the canvas. And just a minute ago, when I was singing the praises of the rabbit skin glue adhesive being relatively thin and degraded and easy to remove, well, I may have spoken too soon, because the only way for me to get this off of this canvas is, again, scraping. Now, I could expose this rabbit skin glue to moisture. I could use laponite or felt pads or directly apply water to it to reactivate that adhesive and soften it up. But I don't want to do that because if I reactivate that adhesive, it will probably penetrate down into the canvas, whereas right now it's just sitting on the surface. And if it penetrates down into that canvas, it's going to make some of the next steps that I do more difficult, if not impossible. And so for this, I'm just going to have to scrape. And this takes a lot less focus and attention than scraping off the face of the painting, but it still does require me to be fully present. Now, it may look like I'm being really aggressive, but that blade is just gliding over the surface of the canvas. And I just want that brittle glue to break up and detach. Now, I've used wire brushes in the past, I've used dental tools in the past, but my favorite tool is just a very sharp scalpel, and let it rake over that canvas, break up that rabbit skin glue, and leave a raw canvas remaining. So, clean off all that rabbit skin glue, the obligatory dusting towards the camera lens that I know everybody loves. And now I can take this painting over to my hot table and address the crack allure. Now, using moisture, heat, and pressure, or what I call a vapor treatment, I am able to soften that canvas and relax those cracks. And I'm keeping the facing on here because